Well guys, we're finally here. After God knows how long, I am finally making the Sodor Throughout the Years Season 1 timeline video, or at least part 1. So without further ado, enjoy the show. Our story begins in 1851. By then, the Industrial Revolution had taken full effect, which eventually led to a group of Soderian businessmen coming together to make plans for a railway that would run from the harbor at Kirkronan all the way down to Province Gate. After receiving approval for the project in 1853 from the Soderian government, construction of the Sodor mainland railway soon commenced. Eventually, in mid-1853, the railway's first mode of power would arrive, those being 3 mules and box tanks named Neil, Clive, and Matthew. Opening in 1854, the railway ran smoothly under the management of the box tanks for a few years, but eventually the workload became too much for them. And as such, 2 new locomotives from the Northeastern Railway were bought in 1861. These 2 engines were named Jeremy and Jerome. We then skip to early 1864, when construction on the new narrow gauge line from Province Gate all the way to the site quarry in Ballard, Wales commenced. The line's first engine, named Scarloey, would arrive in 1865. With its second engine, Rhenius, arriving shortly before the railway's opening later that year. The S&M would eventually buy 2 GWR 1076 class locomotives in 1875, named Katie and Carly. These 2 locomotives were brought to help with the railway's extension of Vicarstown, which would be finished unopened later in 1876. But following this, the railway's ultimate extension of Barrow was put on hold for nearly a decade, mainly because the railway didn't have the resources to build a bridge sturdy enough to cross the channel. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the island, more railways were starting to be developed, the first one of which, built in 1884, was the Mid-Sodor Railway. It was originally built as a tramway, but eventually following a major redevelopment of the line, it also began running goods services, with its first 3 engines, Duke, Smudger, and Bertram, arriving in 1887. Another one of these new railways was the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway. Opened in 1889, its first engine, Colin, arrived that same year, and its second engine, Lily, arrived in 1890. Sadly, due to financial reasons, the MSR eventually dissolved all the remaining tram engines in 1894, leaving its number 7, Tim, as the last remaining one on the railway. The WNS would acquire its third engine in 1895, named Adam. The S&M acquired what would be their final locomotive in 1897, a Furness Railway K1 named Johnson, who was purchased to run express services from Kirkronan to Vicarstown. Along the coast of the island in 1902, a small line would be built running from Knapford all the way to the lead mine at Torreyrack. Albert Regaby, its chief mechanical engineer at the time, would go on to design 4 vertical boiler locomotives that he nicknamed the Coffee Pots. However, one night the line along the coast was washed away, and as such they were forced to reroute the line to Knapford. The next year, the Mid-Sodor obtained 2 new locomotives named Falcon and Proteus. On his first run up the mountain road, Falcon derailed and nearly fell off the edge to his death, but thankfully Duke managed to save him. That same year, the Wellsworth and Sudbury Railway obtained its 4th locomotive named Lady, to help run trains to and from the newly established clay pits. Unfortunately, the following year, there were 2 major accidents on the WNS, a rock slide at the clay pits and a huge accident near Lower Sudbury, which took the lives of Colin and Adam, which would ultimately cost the railway so much that it went bankrupt by early 1906. And while Lady was sold to another railway, Lily was left abandoned in an old shed. Meanwhile, the S&M's previous attempts at building a bridge to the mainland hadn't been very successful. However, following the collapse of Ballyhoo Tunnel, the railway was forced to solve Carly, Jeremy, and Jerome. Thus, the S&M began having financial difficulties afterwards, and as such, in 1910, they made an agreement with the Ellsbridge and Knapford Railway to have both lines merged into one railway. The line would operate for around 4 years until around mid-1914, when World War I broke out, and as such, the government passed an act known as the Sodor Railways Act of 1914, which was made to give all majorly populated areas of the island a rail connection. And so, under the management of Sir Topham Hatt I, it was made official on July 23, 1914, with construction starting shortly after. For the first few months, everything went fine, until one night in October of that year when Katie was pulling a workman's train down to Ellsbridge, but she was running late and making up for lost time. However, this meant she wasn't paying attention and didn't see the bent rails on the bridge that ran over the Els River, until it was too late. The railway had to pay the families of the victims, and Katie was killed upon impact. As such, they had to sell off Johnson to keep within the budget. Thankfully, however, they were able to land a prototype locomotive named the Winston. Things slowly calmed down after the accident, and construction continued once again. And this will be the end of part 1, and I hope you guys stay tuned for part 2. So, yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.